video explores the importance of prior knowledge. The big question for this presentation is why? Why is it important to establish prior learning? Well, if we and our learners really understand why it's important, this helps to ensure that it's not just a task that is done at the start of a topic, but instead has a positive and long-lasting impact on learning. There are two main reasons why prior learning is so important. The first is to do with our brains. It's the connections made between new learning and prior learning which really help make learning stick and helps learners to anchor and make sense of new learning. And the second is that the knowledge of prior learning, as well as ongoing formative assessment, helps to ensure that the right levels of pace and challenge is found for all. Let's now explore that first reason in more detail. Making learning stick. Making connections between prior learning and new learning really helps to make new learning stick. Students need to make sense of new information by reference to what they already know. This image is taken from the work of Efrat First, a cognitive neuroscientist. It shows how new information is constructed in the brain on the basis of prior knowledge. The first image, before learning, shows what knowledge we have already. This is our prior knowledge. It's critical that we have the relevant prior knowledge to build on and that we are supported to make the connections between prior learning and new learning, to help make sense of new learning and to help make it stick. Linking new learning to prior learning is absolutely key, as it is when new information can hook onto existing knowledge that it moves into our long-term memory and learning has occurred as we can now retrieve that information for future use. The second reason why establishing prior knowledge is so important is that it helps to determine the appropriate pace and challenge for all learners. Here we can see the road analogy used again to consider our learner's journey. We understand the learner journey, whether it be through the BGE, senior phase, or a specific curriculum for excellence level, and we know roughly where we need to start and move on from. However, we've all taught lessons where, when we start, we realise that our learners are either far further on or further back than we expected. If this is the case, we risk either going over old ground again or starting at a point where there is not secure prior knowledge to support new learning. If we don't identify essential prior learning, these threshold concepts, and then check for this in our learners, we run the risk of not pitching learning appropriately in terms of starting point, pace, and challenge. Our working memory processes new learning, but can only hold a few pieces of information at once, between about 4 and 7. We need to prioritise this limited space for new learning we want to focus on, and not have it overloaded by having to manage too much. For example, if we're teaching children how to find a fraction of an amount, we know that essential prior learning includes knowing their tables and being able to multiply and divide. If this prior learning is not secure, then children's working memory will become overwhelmed with both the new learning and the assumed prior knowledge. We want to reduce our learners' cognitive load by assessing prior knowledge and then starting from where it was last secure to avoid overwhelming the working memory. So when we are planning learning, we need to ask ourselves the questions. What is the new learning? What do we want our learners to focus their working memory on? What is secure prior learning, which can be pulled from the long-term memory? And how are we sure that the prior learning is secure? We'll explore ways to check or identify prior learning later on. Before that, when we assess prior learning, we need to be prepared to adapt our plans. If learners know more than we expected, we don't need to teach all of what we planned, and we can identify a more appropriate starting point. Equally, if they know less, then we might have to teach some parts which we would have assumed they knew already. If some learners have secure prior knowledge and others don't, then what could we do? Well, could flexible groupings help, where some learners need taught some of the essential prior knowledge and others can move on or have opportunities for further challenge or application? Or could you provide scaffolds for some learners to help them engage successfully with new learning? We'll explore scaffolding in more detail later in this course. To help secure and retrieve prior knowledge in all learners, Could some teach others if that was appropriate and helpful in your context? The key message here is to use the data gathered on prior learning to ensure you teach from the right starting point with appropriate levels of pace and challenge.